Solidarity, everybody, to every single one of you. It's so good to be home with you. Even if it is virtually, I miss you all dearly. And I have to say, Matt, Linda, you have had an outstanding council so far. Delegates, give yourselves a hand. It's just been terrific. I want to thank you especially for this outstanding panel you had yesterday on health and safety, and for the incredible work being done by local unions to fight for these basic union rights. Listening to you all was a welcome reminder of who the experts of health and safety really are. It's workers, trained health and safety reps. Don't ever forget that as you fight with confidence for safer workplaces. And thank you, Lana. Your work on this legacy project. Is to be commended. Taking Nova Scotia's worst moments of fear, pain, horror, and collective grief, and responding with such a special act of community and solidarity. I appreciate not only the support your organization is providing the victims' families, including their children and communities, but also the necessary reminder of how dangerous violence rooted in misogyny really is, and why our fight for equality must continue with vigilance. Friends, equality, full equality for women and girls is not possible until we end the violence. We must continue to organize for systemic changes that tackle inequality, sexism, workplace harassment, and violence against women. And I know that some days, including April 18th and 19th of last year, that it may seem as if the outcomes we fight for are further away. But consider for 1 minute if we were not there, pushing for change, pushing for gender and racial justice, pushing for reconciliation, pushing for trade union rights. Where would we be? Remember, we can and do make a difference through our trade union work for our daughters, for our sisters, and for all the women we do not know. Lana, you make our union very proud, as Linda said. Thank you for your activism and your leadership. As we head into Pride season, let's all remember that Pride is about equality for all. And like most profound struggles for human rights, including union rights, it has its roots in oppression and protest. Again, we win when we organize. In this case, it was when LGBTQ folks, many of them people of color, fought back against targeted police harassment. The Stonewall riots of 1969 sparked a global pride movement. And today, the struggle against harassment, violence, and discrimination remains central to the work of our LGBTQ2S comrades and allies. Before getting into the rest of my remarks, I would like to recognize the ancestral, traditional, and territorial lands on which we live, learn, organize, and come together this weekend in solidarity. I make this acknowledgement during a time of great sorrow, a time when we mourn the loss of 215 children, knowing there are thousands more out there. More mass graves, more trauma, more pain, more truth to be told, and more truth for us to hear. And we must hear it. Friends, it's not only the government's job to act on the 94 Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. Reconciliation is our responsibility too. We can't wait for politicians and bureaucrats to get their acts together. As working class people, we understand that we share a common struggle in this country and around the world, the fight for human rights for all, to end oppression and racism and exploitation, the fight against an economic system that delivers the vast majority of the wealth to the privileged few. It is through our solidarity, understanding, and action that we will build a better world. I would like to recognize the outstanding leadership of Linda McNeil, your Atlantic Regional Director. Sister, it has been an honor to work with you these past nearly 8 years. You are a fierce, tough, no-nonsense leader who always puts our members first. Workers here in the Atlantic could have no better champion. Your determination has led to gains for workers in the toughest of times, leading the charge for pandemic pay in the Atlantic, for paid sick days, for good jobs as we build back better. Thank you for all you do. Sisters and brothers, comrades, this pandemic has reinforced an old truth that no matter the political stripe of the government, our collective goal must always be to build our own power as a union, as a workers' movement, as a critical, progressive, and powerful force in the democracy of our country, starting in the workplace. We can't depend on governments or employers doing what we need them to do. If we didn't know this before the pandemic, we certainly know it now. It's a reminder to us as trade unionists that no gain is given, but taken because of the courage of workers, because we fought for it on a picket line, organized for it in our workplace using our collective power as a union, or waged a campaign that captured the hearts and minds of our members. We win when we create space for all workers for the struggles and campaigns that we must wage. Women, Black, Indigenous, workers of color, young workers, LGBTQ2S workers, and workers with different abilities. We will not have true solidarity if we don't build it. And without solidarity, we can't win. Friends, we must ensure our demands are inclusive so we can deliver on this broader goal of full equality. Because our union is not just about changing the conditions of work, but the conditions of the world. Remember, friends, it's okay to look back and review why we created this union. It's okay to ask ourselves, have we lived up to those promises and commitments to each other? It's okay to say we must do better, because all of these things are necessary to actually being better, to being a union for everyone. Remember why we created Unifor in the first place. It was an act of hope, but more than that, it was an act of solidarity that we could build something different, and that through our activism, a better world would be possible. I would like to thank the always thoughtful Matt Voice and the Atlantic Council Executive and Standing Committees for your work over the past term. Our regional grassroots structures are crucial to building the kind of relevant and inclusive fighting union we need from coast to coast. I'd also like to recognize the stellar leadership of Sister Jan Murray, who sits on our National Executive Board representing the rail sector, and Keith Sullivan, president of my own local union, who represents the resource sector on our NEB. With Linda, Matt, Jen, and Keith, I can tell you that Atlantic Canada is more than well represented on your National Executive Board. I also want to thank our staff. It's been a tough year for all of them and for all of us. Our staff has been led by the outstanding Mike McMullen, our area director. I want to thank you all for your tireless work on behalf of our members during this most difficult year. Friends, we come from different workplaces, different communities, and different provinces. Gender, race, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, energy and forestry workers, grocery store workers and fishery workers, healthcare and hospitality workers, telecommunication workers, and childcare providers. We build some of the best ships in the world. We deliver people and important goods and services by road, rail, ferry, and air. We vote for different political parties. Yet despite these borders and differences, there is something powerful that connects us, that binds us. We are workers, we are trade unionists, and we believe in a different kind of world. And it is our experiences as workers and our trade union principles that unite us. It is our ability to understand that human rights are for all, not just the privileged few. We live in a world that is growing more and more unequal. This pandemic has worsened this condition. And yet, our inspired fight for worker justice is gaining momentum. Every victory this year is a reminder that we must never give up, no matter how tough the moment is, no matter the setbacks. Imagine for one moment, sisters, if we gave up on our fight for pay equity and universal childcare, if we gave up on our fight to end violence and sexism, to have full reproductive justice. Where would we be? Where would the world be? Instead, we persisted. We persist. And we must continue to do so, even when we want to scream at everyday sexism and harassment that we still face. Scream, yes, but organize too. This pandemic has opened the eyes of the world to the injustice, to racism. It has opened the eyes of the world to the obscene wealth of the few. It is no coincidence, my friend, that this growing wealth inequality has happened while unions are under direct attack. During this pandemic, billionaires saw their wealth skyrocket here in Canada and more so in the United States. Unfettered capitalism has given us Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, the Westons, private long-term care, hedge funds, exploitation, vaccine inequity, climate, racial, and gender injustice. And it has funded an attack on union and worker rights around the world. And in this pandemic, in too many cases, capitalism was put first, ahead of the health of the world's citizens. And yet, we persist, despite their power and wealth. One of our campaigns during this pandemic has been for paid sick days. Imagine having to fight for paid sick days during a global pandemic. Paid sick days should be a given. Paid sick days should be a basic human right. The fact that governments fail to act says a lot about their priorities. The message is clear. Workers are disposable. Yet, it has been workers, many of them women, in healthcare and on the front lines, who have lifted up the world this past year. Working 47 days straight, living in a camper outside a long-term care home because governments have failed them so badly, putting profit before patient and worker safety. They are exhausted, my friends. They lived in fear for a year that they would infect their families and friends. They were desperate to protect the elderly in their care. As the brilliant Catha Forte says, we owe them, and we must fight with them until they have won decent work and fair pay. Friends, on the one hand, Canadian billionaires saw their wealth increase by $78 billion this past year. 78 billion. And on the other hand, 5.5 million Canadians lost their jobs or had their hours of work cut in half. The Weston family, Canada's grocery store giants, saw their profits and wealth increase by billions, while they slashed pandemic pay for grocery store workers, for our members across Newfoundland and Labrador, who risked their health and lives every single day to go to work. As we say in my province, it's enough to make your blood boil. But this is what I do know. This fight is not over, not by a long shot. We will continue to organize for decent work and decent pay for all until we win. Friends, Canada's 87 richest families, on average, have 4,448 times more wealth than the typical working family. Together, these 87 families hold more wealth than the bottom 12 million Canadians combined. Make no mistake, we were never in this pandemic together. There was always an us and them. There were always two pandemics. Just ask the families of the 11 Unifor members who have died from this virus because of their work. Ask the families of the more than 25,000 Canadians who have been lost to this pandemic. And what of our politicians? Too many of them have let us down. They have failed us. Yes, the Atlantic has been a bit of an exception, but even here, we know workers were too often put at risk. And frankly, the Atlantic's record on the pandemic had a lot to do with the nature of community and solidarity of Atlantic Canadians rather than strong political leadership. We must never forget the lessons of this pandemic. We must never forget how we had to fight for the lives and livelihoods of our members and frontline workers everywhere, for basic PPE, for fairness and safe work. We must never forget the 25,000 dead and counting, the thousands of seniors lost because governments place profit over care. We must never forget the cracks this pandemic has further exposed in our social safety net, in our lack of industrial policies that build and keep good jobs in Canada. I know you may be feeling a little tired, but these injustices must give us the strength to continue our work, to mobilize for the better world we know is possible. We must also never forget the kind of work we did as a union facing the most challenging of times in our history. We must be that kind of union into the future. We have faced financial and economic shocks before, but nothing like this pandemic. Nothing that was such a risk to the lives and health and safety of our members, our loved ones, and our neighbors. As your Secretary Treasurer, I knew we had to plan for the worst case scenario if our union was going to survive as a strong, vibrant, relevant force for the long term. We could not allow the pandemic to weaken our ability to fight for our members, for workers, including young workers, because we knew our members would need us more than ever, and the world would need the work of unions more than ever. 15 months into this, and we're not out of it yet. We see how it has disproportionately impacted racialized workers and communities, magnifying all of the inequities so prevalent in our economic and social systems. This is true of the world, as we see poor countries and the global south completely devastated by this virus with little access to vaccines or adequate health care. Canada can do something about this by supporting the lifting of vaccine patents so we can vaccinate the world more quickly. I know this pandemic has not been easy on any of you. Workplace leaders, trade union activists, local presidents, shop stewards. You have been on the front lines fighting for our members every single day during the worst of times. Many of you are volunteers, and I am forever in your debt for your determination and representation at the workplace level. Be proud of your trade union work. We are a stronger union because of you and because of this experience we've had this past year. I think back to March of 2020 when we established our internal COVID task force and the daily calls with reports of mass shutdowns and layoffs. Within 2 weeks, as you heard from Jerry yesterday, 1/3 of our membership was out of work. They were scary times. Friends, our union was at stake, and we all felt the weight of that responsibility. But with calmness and cool heads and planning, we prevailed. We knew we would have to be better more effective, that our members and locals would need us in new and profound ways. This also meant a financial plan that was solid for our union for 2020 and beyond. It meant bringing all of the parts of our union together to act as one. It meant getting ahead of big issues before they became bigger. It meant stepping up. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because I don't do that. 2020 was a hard year on our union. We had 33,000 fewer dues paying members and over $9 million less in dues. And sectors are still struggling. Members are still struggling. Many will never return to the same job. 2021 has been difficult too. But despite all of these challenges, friends, I will say we got through this past year because we worked together. We never let this kind of moment pass us by. We have fought and we have won on many fronts, and we will continue to fight for the kind of world that we all know is possible. There will be tough days ahead, but together we can push through those times by organizing. Even in the worst of times, we must remember who we are. We are proud trade unionists, what we believe in, equality and justice, and what we can accomplish when we organize a better world for all. Friends, I want to end with something Sister Gina Smoke, who I think you're going to hear from in a little bit today, said to me recently as I thanked her and her team for their inspired work this winter with Indigenous people. Gina is Unifor's Indigenous liaison, and they delivered blankets and hot food to Indigenous people on the streets in Winnipeg. Literally, they saved lives. She responded, "Lana, it is heart work." That pretty much describes the work of trade unionists everywhere in our union, including those today who walk a picket line across Unifor. 4 lockouts and 2 strikes. Members locked out in Chetwynd, BC, at 2 locals in Montreal, Quebec, at Reliance Home Comfort across Ontario, to our members on strike at Ocean Concrete in Victoria, and at the mine in Myra Falls in British Columbia. Please send them your solidarity. The pursuit of worker justice is the work of our hearts. Never forget that, sisters and brothers. When we engage our hearts, we can build our union and that better world we strive for. All my love and solidarity. Please be safe.